One more minute. Okay, so those of you who are on, I love being interactive, and this, we can really talk about whatever you want because this is all about you. So become familiar maybe with the chat, or you can unmute yourself however you want to. And I'm going to just go ahead and get started, and we'll just go as long as we can. My name's Kelly White, and I am the Executive Vice President of T3 Talent, and I work for T360. T360 is actually a management consulting company specific to the residential real estate industry. And so we were started by a gentleman named Stefan Schwanapol, who many people have heard of. We started out really as a publications company with the trends reports, and we've really expanded our content on the publication side. But we have consultants that help people in all of the different areas of brokerage. And I have the great fortune of working with all different kinds at T3 Talent. So I work with brokerages, tech companies, franchises, MLS, and associations. And really my domain of expertise is helping companies find great talent and then helping candidates make career transitions. And so one of the things that makes us just a little bit different is that I've actually been an industry practitioner. So I've been a residential real estate agent at one point, been part of a broker ownership group, and in a couple of national franchise companies. So generally speaking, if you all have questions about any of this, whether it's hiring, recruiting, what you should do, we can really have open conversations and dialogue. So I'm just going to start by asking, so are any of you making any key hires either in Q1 or Q2? And feel free to open up your microphone or chat with me on the chat box, but I'm curious if anyone's looking at making hires coming up in the beginning of the year or maybe up to mid-year. Okay, good. I see Antonio raises his hand. What are you looking for? Do you know what you're looking for?
Yeah, I'm actually interviewing a few PAs tomorrow.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
So, and I've filled out all the paperwork I needed for the company to kind of narrow down what I was looking for. I also had an interview with one of the recruiting people. So I'm probably going to be speaking to 3, maybe 4 different potential personal assistants tomorrow, virtual assistants rather.
All right. Well, good. So we have, I think we have 45 minutes today. So I love having somebody that's in the process. Is there anybody else that's looking to hire anytime soon? Nope. Okay. Well, feel free to send in any questions. We're just going to go ahead and get started. And Antonio, we'll open it up as we go through this to be able to be as helpful as we can with you today. So what we're going to talk about today is, number one, why to use a hiring process. And then I'm going to start by I will go over the 10-step process itself, but just very generally, because over the next few sessions, we're going to get really deep into each of the steps. But we also might have some extra time. So then, Antonio, we can, dig in a little deeper if there's some areas that might be helpful, but feel free to stop me as we go through this. So there's a lot of key reasons to use a hiring process. And there's 5 that I think about, and there's probably more than that. But, I'll just say it this way. The number one reason, just like anything, to use a process is important. But in hiring, I think the main reason to use a process is it reduces what I like to say is the subjectiveness of the process, because often what happens, especially in hiring, if you don't have a process, then you're not able to actually gather data on candidates and then be able to compare them not only to each other, but also to the job description and the candidate profile and those things. So what we're trying to do is create a process that allows you to gather information and use it in a way, instead of just hiring based on your gut feeling or how you feel or what your instincts are, because that's going to really reduce kind of the subjectiveness and provide more objectivity into the process. So let's go through each of these 5. So it also helps with reduced hiring costs. And there's a lot of ways that you can look at this, but I often think of it as it relates to succession planning. And if you're like me, I have, a small team that's growing, and I have a business unit that's growing, probably similar to a lot of you all that have teams. And so you might not think of it as succession planning, but if you're like me, you think about reduced hiring costs as it relates to, if you have someone really great that you bring in that supports you, like Antonio with his personal assistant, then the overall cost in the organization is reduced, because it's going to allow you to be able to go out and do what we would think are the higher dollar productivity activities in order to continue to grow your team or your business unit like I am. So it allows you to think ahead about who do you need in your organization as you plan, hopefully you plan for the 1 year, the 3 year, and the 5 year. And so often what happens is companies regularly look at their financial statements, they regularly look at their cash flow statements. But one thing I've noticed is that they don't necessarily look at their organization and think about their team or the organization in terms of who are the people that you're going to need in 1 year, and who are the people that you're going to need in 3 years and 5 years, and kind of design your organization. And so this process will help you do that. And I really think that at this moment in time in our current situation, it's a very interesting exercise to do, to look at the 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, because you can actually really be in a great situation if you get systems and processes and people in place to really take advantage of sort of when the market shifts into the upside. So that speaks a little bit to the reduced hiring and organizational costs. The third thing is, with the right process, which means you'll find the right people, is you're going to increase your overall productivity, right? So I doubt, Antonio doesn't want to hire an assistant without finding the right one, so that way his productivity increases. Very similar to me. I just hired an executive recruiter, and my productivity has already increased because now that I've gotten through kind of the training period and she knows what she's doing, I'm able to now focus more on marketing and lead generation and really kind of leverage my skills in a way that they can bring more business into the business itself. So that takes you in line with the increased revenue. So all of these things are really kind of building upon each other. The other thing that a hiring process does, which this is one that I don't think that everyone thinks of, and that is, you're building the culture of your organization on the front end. And if you design a hiring process, then you can actually create the snippets that you want those candidates to be exposed to, so that you can find out, first of all, are they a good culture fit? But second of all, if you think about it, you're really teaching them about your culture, right? So how you interview and how you show up and what your value proposition is and what your core values are, like all of these things should be part of your interview process and your hiring process, which then actually helps you build the culture from the front end, and then make sure that you really find someone that's the right culture fit. The other thing that I want to talk briefly about that a hiring process does for you is it reduces the amount of confirmation bias. And so most of us want to impact diversity and inclusion in our organizations. And so this is such an interesting thing. I don't know if you all know this or not, but the way that the brain works is, within like the first 5 to 10 seconds when you meet a person, your brain automatically, just as a human being, starts to make assessments about that person or that thing or that situation. And then what happens is that your brain will then, so like, let's say, for example, you meet a person and your first thought is, oh, I really like that person. Then your brain will continue to try to find evidence of liking them more and more and more, right? And that's a little bit of what confirmation bias is. It's basically your brain is giving you confirmation of the thought that you already had initially. And so when you have a process, what it allows you to do, it allows you to say, okay, yeah, initially I like that person, and let's go through a process to make sure that that individual and their skills and their abilities and their background actually fit what we need, versus just going with that initial, like, yeah, I like the person, so we should try to hire them. The other thing too is, I don't want to forget to say this here. I don't know if you've ever experienced this or not. Probably in your sales career you have. I know in mine I did. But, one of the things about hiring is we like people who are behaviorally like us. So we naturally gravitate to people who are like us. And so one of the interesting things, Antonio, this might be for you, is when you're hiring an assistant, the interesting thing about that is generally the assistant is a different behavioral style than us, because you need someone that can support your efforts, that's more detail oriented. They might not be as sales oriented as people like us are. And so your initial like read on that person, if you're just reading them, is they might not connect with you as much because you're very different. I mean, I just like to say it, animals, right? Like you're just behaviorally wired different. And so this was a really helpful thing for me in learning about hiring, that, you know, sometimes depending on the role, I'm not going to naturally gravitate to that person just because I'm literally just almost completely opposite behaviorally from them. So I'm going to take a breath there. It's, you know, that's been already at like about 10 minutes. Anybody have any questions about why to use a process or confirmation bias? Otherwise, I'm going to kind of just go into an overview of the 10 steps, and we can hone into some of those for Antonio, since he's got a lot of interviews tomorrow. But anyone have any questions, comments? Okay. Well, I will just continue to talk. I geek out on this hiring stuff, so I'm going to just keep moving on forward. Stop me if you want. Okay. So the 10-step hiring process, I'm going to just go through each of these 10 steps briefly. And then I think what we'll do with Antonio's game is we'll ask Antonio where he might need the most help for tomorrow, and then we can focus on that. And then, like I said, in our next sessions, we're going to continue to talk about these fairly well in depth. Okay, so the first step is number one, and it's funny, this is a job description. I already checked this presentation, but for whatever reason, that box is just small enough that it doesn't bring up the one. Step number one is completing a job description. So a job description tends, what I see often, and you guys might have seen this too, is I see job descriptions and they're a laundry list of the 1,000 things that a person needs to do. And so what happens with a laundry list of 1,000 things that a person needs to do is you have no idea if they're doing the things that are going to actually move the needle in your organization. So when you work on a job description, my recommendation is that it be very results oriented. You know, there's a thing called key performance indicators, which is a very measurable result that you would want that person to do in that specific role, so that it's going to change your organization for the better. And if they produce that result, then it should, you know, in the case of an assistant, it should free up your time, Antonio. So you want to just make sure that that's clearly aligned. And then I would say that you should, in most of these roles, you're going to have maybe 3 key performance indicators. You might have 3 to 5. Sometimes I've heard it called objectives and key results. But what you want is you want something measurable that you can tell somebody, like, these are the things that you're gonna hold them to, so that way, if they do it, you'll know. And if they don't do it, you'll know. But if they do it, it's going to impact your organization. And then once you've written a clear job description, then what you're going to do is write a talent profile. And this is where most people don't do this part. And I think this is a missing gap for most people. They do a job description, which is the litany of things, and then they start talking to people. But the candidate or the talent profile is who can do that job, right? So you've got 3 to 5 key performance indicators. That's great. But what kind of person can do that job? Like, what skills do they need to have? Do they need to be licensed? What behavioral style do they need to be? Detail oriented. You know, I speculate, Antonio, for a personal assistant, you're going to need somebody that's a combination of a people person and also a detail oriented person. So, you know, if you're using a behavioral profile like the DISC or something like that, that might be the I that's an influencing, inspiring, and the C that's compliant and correct. But you're going to need to find somebody that has the ability to work with you and work with the agents, but they probably need to have a higher level of detail orientation than people like us do, because we're out there, you know, doing the revenue, doing the sales, and our detail orientation is probably going to be a little bit lower. So you want to detail also, like, what is a good culture fit? What are I like to write down, what are the top 5 things I want in this candidate, and what are the top 5 things I want to avoid? So Antonio, if you haven't done that, you might just quickly go, what do I want? What do I want to avoid? And then what are the minimum criteria that would be successful in this job? And I always like to say that I believe this in our industry because I've lived it myself, that most of us are in very lean environments where we don't have a lot of margin. So I think that any person that you're bringing into your team, you're hiring, really needs to be kind of in the top 5% of all the talent, right? Like, you're not just looking for any Joe Schmo. I mean, you're looking for a person, Antonio, that's going to make your life easier, that's going to take charge so that you can go out and really produce more in your business. And so I find things like urgency. So urgency, I think, is really important in this business because it's such a deadline driven. I think somebody who has high resiliency is important. This job, even on the assistant side, requires a lot of resiliency. I think it requires tenacity, most of those roles. So maybe just think about some of the key things that would work in your environment and write those down. And then once you've done a great job description with your really targeted results that you want, and then you go, okay, now this is the person who can do this, then and only then are you going to go out and try to find candidates. And there's a myriad of ways that we can find candidates. But I think I'll stop real quick and see, does anyone have any questions on the job description or the talent profile, just generally speaking?
Yeah, I've got a question. This is Mark.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
Great.
Do you have any examples of like job description? We're going through the same thing. We're actually looking for like a transaction coordinator / assistant. So we're having a hard, like, I know what I think I want, but I don't know if the job description is exactly right. You know what I mean? I would like to see some examples to help me like kind of dial it in. And the same thing with the talent profile.
You got it. My email is Kelly, Kelly, at T360sixty.com. Just email me. I pretty much have every job description template that there is. And if it's one that I don't have, I'll do it for you, at least to give you an example. So feel free to send me an email and I will send you what I have. And that's really how to use me is as an advisor to be able to help you with that. So happy to do that. Anybody else?
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. You're in Texas too, huh?
Yes. Great day.
Go Texas. Okay. So then you're going to go find candidates. I'm going to give you a very simple exercise about finding candidates that you can do. Once you have this job description and talent profile, it makes it a lot easier because then you have a packet of information. And I basically have an exercise called Who Do You Know Who? And it's very simple. I mean, you guys know what to do because you already do all of this in your sales business. But what I like to, and what I do love about doing this is it's actually also a good way to talk to people. So it's like I think a full move when you already have a sales business is write down the list of, I'd say 200 people that you either know that are in the business or that are in your network that are business people. And I just literally, I go online, whether it's LinkedIn, an email, a text, or a phone call. And I say, I reach out to those 200 people on my list and I have a conversation and say, listen, my team's growing. I'm super excited. I'm looking for like a top 1% personal assistant. Here's the 3 things that I need them to do. And they need to be the kind of person that can manage me, that can handle stress, like that kind of thing. And then I say, who do you know who sounds like might be a good fit for that? So you want to ask the who do you know who might be a good fit for that. And they go, oh, I don't know. And then you're like, listen, let me send you this information. You can send them the job description. And then when you send it to them, say, feel free to share that around too, because then they can also then be forwarding it around. And so you're basically using your network to find third-party recognized people that can send you candidates. And I feel like that way is probably the fastest way to find people. It might take a little bit more time on your part, but I also feel like in a sales business that you're already going to be talking to people that are probably relevant for you to talk to anyway. And then the other big tool that I use is LinkedIn. So you can really use, a LinkedIn strategy to find candidates, but we're going to go very deep into this in the next couple of sessions. So happy to share more in depth. But is anyone in a situation where they need desperately to find candidates right now that has a question? No. Okay. All right. So then once you have candidates, then we need to do a pre-screen, and this might be helpful to Antonio, but I do the same pre-screen every single time, no matter what candidate. And the reason we do it this way, once again, is because you're doing a process and you need to ask people the same thing in order to be able to compare them against each other. So that's the reason to do the pre-screen a certain way. And what I would recommend that you do is on the pre-screen so I think Antonio is starting this process. He has 3 people. So for example, in his situation, he would schedule the pre-screen for 30 minutes. On Zoom, preferably. If you don't do Zoom, do the phone call. And then you're going to have a very standard way that you go through the pre-screen. And I know 30 minutes doesn't sound like a long time, but I get so much information in 30 minutes. And here's why. In pre-screening and in interviewing, you really are not the one talking. You want to get people engaged enough on the front end. So what I typically do is like literally 3 minutes of kind of rapport building. And I'm sure you all are good at this because you're salespeople. So you already know how to do this. So you're going to get people engaged in the first 3 minutes. And then you're going to say, literally, I say one sentence about my company. And then I say, well, today, it's really for us to find out more about you. And then I'm going to leave some time at the end for you to ask me any questions that you might have. And then I have a standard set of questions that I go through each time. And then at the end, I allow them to basically ask me any questions that they have. And I have a standard line, and this is really write this down or write a script, or if you need this for tomorrow, Antonio, at the end of the pre-screen, you're going to say, I'm in the initial stages of the interview process. And if I would like to meet with you again, I will let you know within the next, 2 to 3 weeks or whatever. So what I have found is if you tie it off with a bow, then that's really helpful at the end of the pre-screen, because then you don't have to think about, I need to go back and communicate with all these people, or they're all calling you or emailing or whatever. So that puts a little bow on it. And then it allows you to kind of get through all the pre-screens, because you want to talk to those pre-screens before you decide who you take into the full interview process. Because once they're in the full interview process, you're going to start spending more and more time with them. You want to make sure initially, and honestly, I say 80% of people I pre-screen never make it past a pre-screen, right? So as soon as you start to talk to them, you'll probably know. So any questions on the pre-screen? And I guess I don't know. I think you all have my standard pre-screening form, if I'm not mistaken, so that if Antonio needed it, I think it's somewhere in the platform. Oh, I'm doing the pre-screen virtually on Zoom or on the phone. I have a famous saying, you don't want them in your office unless you want them in your office, because once they're in your office, as nice as you can be, you're still going to be exerting a lot more time, energy, and resources. So you want to get really good on the pre-screen so that you spend all your time on these last stages. The VA company I'm working with to interview. Okay. Yeah, great. Oh, okay. Gotcha. Thank you, Antonio. So this can really help you a ton, because you're going to weed out the majority of the people. And I would recommend that you're only going to take maybe 2 or 3 people into the full interview phase, where you start asking the full interview questions that are I have recommendations for an hour interview. I have a great format for a core values interview or a culture interview. I swear, if you just did the culture interview on the upfront, you'll probably rule out a lot of the people, because I think a lot of times the skills can be taught. But I'm always also with checking the urgency and the tenacity and the resiliency of the people, because I think that the skills can be taught. So once you get through the interview process, let me stop there. We're on 30 minutes. We've gotten through sort of these basics of the 5 steps. Anybody have any questions that they need about pre-screening or interviewing before we just kind of go through these on the surface, the next 5? Okay. Perfect. So, and this shows these things in a linear steps, but you can also kind of at the interview point, you might want to throw in your behavioral assessment kind of around the same time period. So does anyone here use behavioral assessments on their team or within their hiring or anything like that yet? No. Okay. I think that it's really, I like using behavioral assessments as part of the process. I would say it's probably 20% of the process. And I do think that in certain roles, like if you're hiring sort of a recruiter or you're hiring somebody that you know needs to go out and handle a lot of rejection, I think that doing the behavioral tools is really important. I do also think that it's important on the transaction coordination side too, because I think you want to find that right person. And sometimes it's harder to tell, but those are just my thoughts. If you're not currently using them, I wouldn't worry about it. I think that if you decide to adopt sort of a behavioral tool that you can use with your team, I like it for team building and communication. There's a lot of value in having that as part of your team, but I would say use it as part of your whole team, not just necessarily the hiring process. The easy one is the DISC. Easy to learn, easy to administer, not super expensive. So that might be something you consider kind of in the future. Number 7 is, and I love this one, this is my favorite one. I almost think that if you just did a core values interview, the pre-screen and this experiential assignment, you'd have everything. But pretty much every job has a way that you can actually test the candidate to see if they can actually do that job. And I was on a call a couple of weeks ago where we brainstormed like 10 things that you could have a transaction coordinator do to see if they could do that job. But I'll give you a good example. So I just hired a recruiter, and in the process, that person, I gave them a job description that was very specific. I gave them my resume. I had them interview me, and then I had them do a complete write-up to tell me whether or not they would actually recommend me to the client. And so, if you're hiring a graphic artist, you might want them to do some kind of a graphic artist, some kind of a content piece. If you're hiring a finance person, you might have them do a spreadsheet, like just coming up with something that they can do so that you can see their work. And then the only caveat I have there is check whatever laws are in your state, because some states are really weird about having to pay people for that stuff. But in my mind, especially like if you're having them produce content, but in terms of the experiential assignment, someone coaching, someone recruiting, doing a recruiting call, like those kinds of things are really good ways to see if people can do it. And then step 8, and this is the one where most people don't do this, and I understand why, because this is the hardest thing to do. And I call it due diligence. Most people call it references, but I'm going to teach you a process that will get you information that you can gather on the candidate that's completely different than how you normally do it. And the idea is you need to get validated information from third-party people to find out, is any of this that they're saying true? And what are the potential upsides? What are the potential downsides? Like all of those things, you really have to find that out before you bring those people into your organization. Because once they're in your organization, the cost of a bad hire. So has anyone had a bad hire? You want to talk about cost of a bad hire? Anyone? You know what the estimated number is in terms of how much it costs your organization? Anybody have a guess?
$50,000.
Yeah. Now 50,000 would be probably even a lower end person, because I've seen it, like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, I think, gives it really low, like 2 to 3 times the person's annual salary. But Bradford Smart, from that top grading book, they say anywhere from like 14 to 18% of that person's salary, because of not the fixed costs, but all of the other costs that are associated with the bad hire. And I make the claim that the mediocre hires are even worse, because what happens with the mediocre hires is they're just good enough, but you have the opportunity cost of not having a great hire. Often the ones that are really bad, instantly, and we're usually good at going, yeah, that's not going to work. But it's sort of the ones that we limp along with that are just kind of doing it because it's so much effort to either do the process again or, whatever the case might be. So Ryan says, I hired the wrong assistant and also without having a full plan ready before hiring. Oh yeah, hard lesson learned. You are correct. Because honestly, that's a huge part too. We're not quite there yet. That's the 90 days. But once you've gone through all this, then you have a decision to make, an offer to make. And I like having what I call a mutual expectation conversation with that candidate. Like, one of the ones that I'll just share what I do. You can probably tell already just from being on here with me, but I'm a very direct person. And so my communication style tends to be very direct. So I always ask at this point, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being indirect and 10 being direct, how direct will you want me to be when I'm giving you feedback? Right. And if that person says I want 5, then I know that I'm going to have to really work on, using my messaging in a way that's going to help them. And then I also say on a scale of 1 to 10 to them, with 1 being indirect and 10 being direct, that I would like you to give feedback to me as a 10. And here's what that looks like. That means that you tell me immediately, that you call me up, that you just shoot it to me straight. I don't need any fluff. My feelings don't get hurt. I won't get defensive. I just need to know. I need to know as soon as just tell me. And so if you have things that you've noticed that have gone awry, then that might be a place to do that at that final moment, kind of in the decision and the offer. And then you have the first 90 days. So I think that, to Ryan's point, you can go through this whole process, and literally I've seen this with clients. You have the greatest candidate, and then in the first 90 days, they don't have an onboarding and onboarding, training, and integration program that sets them up for success. And so it really is, I want to say 80% of it, right? So you can get a great person and fail on that side, and then it starts to have cascading consequences. So Deanna says, I went through 7 assistant doing it the wrong way. Now I have had my current assistant for 5 years. Well, thank you, Deanna. Great job. And isn't it just like the greatest relief in the world? Like, once you have a great hire, then why. I guess we learn our lessons the hard way, but I think if you haven't had a great hire, sometimes you don't know the difference. So I think both of those are really great points. So any other questions or comments or feedback? Deanna, do you want to talk about what you did that made it so great for 5 years?
Sure. What happened is in the beginning, like what you were saying, I was hiring people who I liked, who were more like myself. Yes. And, oh, they're wonderful. I like to be around them. They're going to, this is going to be great. They like the things I like. And then I realized I need someone who can overcome my, weaknesses. And so then I started trying to hire towards that, but I still wasn't doing, the experimental assignment part of it.
Yes.
And then I started doing the DISC assessment. Now I won't put anybody on my team without doing the DISC assessment. And so I think that was a really big aha, that again, I was hiring when I went back, a lot of high I's and some high D's. And, for the assistant, I really felt I needed someone who was steady Eddie, consistent, detailed oriented, the CS kind of personality and then I did do some experimental, give them some tasks, put them on the computer, because, one of the people I had hired had, she was an older woman who just wasn't up on technology, and she thought she could learn, and that was a disaster. She actually quit after 30 days, and I was relieved because I was going to have to let her go. But then, there was another one who told me, oh, yes, I know how to do, what at that time was Top Producer, my CRM. I've been trained on it. I worked for another realtor. I was her assistant. Well, come to find out, none of it really panned out, that she was hired to do that, but never did. She ended up being her showing agent. And so she didn't know how to really get in and dive deep. So this one that I've had now for 5 years, I've learned along the way to be less rigid and let a lot more go and trust in her. And it's been, the first year was painful, but we had great times in, figuring it out, how to work together. And my way doesn't necessarily mean the best and right way all the time. So you have to be willing to let go of some stuff once you find the right person.
That is true. And if you find the right person, I'm sure Deanna will test this, they'll take it away from you.
Oh yes.
They're going to be like,
everything's
okay,
in her hands now.
Get out of my way. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I had to stop stepping on her toes all the time, which
And you also have to
answering her emails that really were her emails to answer, whatever. It's changed our business.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Antonia, you had something to say?
I was just to say, I mean, you have to be able to trust that person. What's the point of having them? If you don't trust them, if you have to turn around and double check everything they're doing, you might as well do it yourself. You have to be able to trust the people that are working with you and for you so that you can go out and get new business.
And remember this, in the first 90 to 120 days, I'm going through that right now. I'm at the 90-day mark. You remember, you have to be very, very clear. That's why having this great job description helps. You need to be very clear about the expectations, what I like to say conditions of satisfaction are, but what is the performance standard? Because the other thing is where I see people sometimes mess up, to your point, Antonio, is they hire someone, they automatically trust them, they don't train them, and then it's a train wreck, right? Like you trust them once you trust but verify, right? Train them, watch them, make sure they can do it, and then you let them do it. But until they can do it to the level that you want them to do it, just make sure that you don't completely relinquish that either. So it's like this fine line, because most of us, I think to Deanna's point, we're all a bunch of control freaks. And so, and that's, I think it was Ryan who was like, make sure you have the plan in place of what you're going to do to get them onboarded and integrated successfully in those first 90 days. So.
And that's what I also have seen others make the mistake. It's like, okay, you're my assistant now, here, take it away. And it's like, you have to train them to do it, what needs to be done and how you want it, how to prioritize things, because they don't know what your priorities are. And
and often you have to reprioritize because we're so fast.
And that's a big one. Like my assistant will just write to me. She goes, well, you gave me 5 things, and you changed the priority. So which now is the most important? And, so you got to communicate with them. And so they feel like they're doing a good job and doing it the way you want it to.
Well, and I've learned, I don't know about you all, but I've also learned to teach the skill of managing up, because that's one of the things I have on my, usually on my talent profile, is the ability to manage up. But what I have found is people don't know what managing up is. So that's exactly what Deanna's talking about, which is, okay, they need to manage up, which is, okay, I've got 10 things today. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. Well, you don't just like either sit there and do nothing or just like do whatever. You want to be able to communicate up with Deanna and say, I've got these things. Do you want me to do this or this, which is the priority? And I've also found that in communicating with individuals, like I do this in email, my subject line says request. And then my request is very clear with the deadline, the very specific details of like what needs to be done and by when. And if it's urgent, I put urgent, like this supersedes everything that you're doing. So that's been sort of an effective way for me to do request management in the emails, is like have sort of that stuff in the subject line, but it requires me to think that way, which is not my normal way of thinking. Well, great. This is a great conversation. Thank you all for participating. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I think that you all have my email address for those people who want any job description templates. Trisha, do you know if the pre-screening form is in a platform that you have already, or if anyone needs the pre-screening form, they should email me because I'm happy to send it to them.
Herson is already all over that, and it'll be added to the platform, I believe, right, Herson?
All right. Correct. We're looking into that right now, so we'll add it.
Okay, no problem. Awesome.
Great.
Well, listen, anyone, Antonio, I know you're in the middle of interviewing. If you get to a phase where you need help, just email me, and I'm happy to happy to help you through it if you get stuck at any point. And thank you all for your participation. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kelly.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Appreciate
Bye.
your
Thanks
time.
for Jefferson.
Bye-bye.
Hey, Rudy.
Thanks so much, Kelly. That was awesome.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, that was fun. I love having people on. Perfect.
Great.
Yeah,
So I
I'm
think-
actually ex-HR, so you're ticking all the boxes. You're so on point. It's awesome.
Oh, good. Thank you. Good. I'm glad these people, they were participating. That's helpful. I know I feel bad. I left my chat open and I realized that you guys were recording that. So that probably wasn't helpful.
No, not
Did
at
you
all.
see it on the screen? Well, sorry, I won't do that next time, but that's no fun for you. Sorry on that one. I realized too late.
Gotcha. Great.
All
So
right, well-
yeah, I see that Tiff had also sent the pre-screening hiring doc template. So I'll look into that right now to add it to the
Okay.
session portal.
No problem. They can literally just call me if they need any, or call or email me, and I'd be happy to help them.
Great. All
Okay.
right, so-
Again, good to see you guys. Appreciate
Likewise.
it.
Definitely. Have a
See you
good
next
one.
time.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.